cancellation of PT is something that many people still get annoyed about to this day, and for good reason, as it was shaping up to be one of the more interesting Silent Hill games for a long time. It's clear its impact influenced many games with the likes of Resident Evil 7, but Visage absolutely nails what PT was going for, and introduces players to Dwayne, an everyday person who's seemingly caught up in his grief, with the story consisting of 5 separate chapters. Each of these chapters explore 5 different inhabitants of the mysterious house you find yourself stuck in, and links to the supernatural pull that the home has over them. The home ends up being just as much of a character as the ghosts that hide within its walls, and thanks to the incredible atmosphere it creates, it ends up being a clear love letter to PT as well. Now in terms of gameplay, this is where Visage truly excels, and strips away the usual action focus of modern horror games, and instead decides to fully commit to building tension and wondering what's going to be around each and every corner. Exploring the house is what drives everything forward, and you'll be decoding cryptic symbols, peering into alternate realities, and solving a wide range of puzzles that serve to slowly unravel the history of the families that once called this place their home. What really stands out though is the sanity mechanic, which feels like it's been lifted straight out of Amnesia, but with a few changes that make its implementation all the better. Should you stay in the dark for too long, linger near a ghost, or stare directly at one, your sanity will begin to fall, and as it does, your hallucinations will intensify as the house's layout unpredictably shifts and its threats become even more aggressive. It's what really helps Visage succeed, and if you were at all fond of PT, it feels like what it promised but sadly could never deliver. Resident Evil 7 was a huge comeback for the series after it seemingly abandoned its horror roots with a much more action-centric approach with RE6. This time it took us to the Baker Mansion, situated in Louisiana, that would be the backdrop for one of the most terrifying entries in the series to date. You take up the role of Ethan Winters, who finds himself drawn to the remote Baker's home after receiving a message from his wife who he believed to be dead. Upon arriving, and in true Resident Evil fashion, not everything is as it seems, and it's not long before you're plunged into an ever-escalating nightmare that, despite the change to first person, manages to stay true to the series' roots. This includes a huge emphasis on item management that serves to heighten the tension as you make your way through the game, as well as a wide selection of weapons to help fight back against the Baker family and the hordes of molded that roam the corridors. From pistols to shotguns and circular saws, there's plenty of variety, making sure you've got more than a fighting chance of staying alive. Of course, puzzles play just as big of a role as the horror and combat itself, and harken back to the earlier entries in the series to see you having to combine items in logical ways or decipher codes left by one of the many different notes throughout the game that also help to flesh out the story. The main thing that RE7 excels at though is just how well it builds its atmosphere, that ends up feeling like an incredibly oppressive but immersive experience, with the RE engine delivering some truly stunning visuals, and to make it even better, it can be played in VR as well, which is perhaps one of the most intense ways to experience it. Ultimately, RE7 wasn't just a return to form for the series, but a bold evolution which proved that there was much more left for it to give. Song of Horror is one of those indie hidden gems that never really got the attention it deserved, and brings with it an old school approach to its gameplay with fixed camera angles that only heighten the terrifying atmosphere throughout the game. It all revolves around a mysterious box that unleashes an evil force known as the Presence, with the game following several characters as they're all drawn into the mystery, which takes you to several locations such as a haunted mansion to a grim and bleak abandoned asylum, where you've got to put the pieces together and get to the bottom of the box's origins. For anyone who grew up playing the horror classics like Silent Hill and Resident Evil, Song of Horror feels like it's been cut from the same cloth, and its gameplay, as I mentioned earlier, will feel incredibly familiar, with its blend of fixed camera angles, inventory management, and well thought out puzzles with a twist. That being the reason for so many characters, as permadeath is the real fear that will always be in the back of your mind as you play. The Presence will constantly hunt you down, and is just as unpredictable as you would expect, with its slamming doors out of nowhere or appearing as ghostly apparitions as you explore. And it's all tied to how you behave in the game, and should you make too much noise or avoid subtle clues like flickering lights or whispering voices, it might strike and result in you having to leave an area unexplored or lose one of your characters altogether. It's this risk versus reward that lies at the heart of the game, and of course ends up being one of the major factors in how it builds its tension and horror. So for anyone looking for something that blends the old with the new, Song of Horror is definitely worth playing through, and will likely stick with you long after the credits have rolled. Coming from the same mind behind the Resident Evil games, The Evil Within released to critical acclaim and felt like a real return to the horror that was lacking from Mikami's RE4, which would go on to produce a sequel that built upon every aspect that the first game introduced and improved the formula in many different ways. You once again take up the fight as Sebastian, with the game being set 3 years after the events that took place in the Beacon Hospital, where he's drawn back into the STEM system, a sort of virtual reality that merges the mind of its user into a shared nightmarish world, where he hopes to rescue his daughter, who's become a key aspect in the corporation behind the system's plans. The gameplay feels like a natural next step and strikes the perfect balance between horror and action, but instead of being a linear experience, the sequel opens up into semi-open world areas, allowing you to explore the madness of the world at your own pace. This switch up is what really helps the game come into its own, where you've got to search for ammo, crafting materials and gel, which can be used to unlock skills that greatly enhance your chances of surviving the mayhem. Stealth is also a great option for navigating the dimly lit streets, but once the moment calls for it, the combat feels tight and responsive, allowing you to take advantage of a range of different weapons to fight off enemies or set up elaborate traps for them to fall into. There's a good variety of them as well, forcing you to adopt different tactics, and that's not even mentioning the boss fights, where all of these systems come into play and where the combat is truly at its best. It ends up being something that polishes the first game's rough edges, and with its seamless balance of stealth, exploring and combat, it's probably something that you'll want to revisit time and time again. After the absolute train wreck that was Alien Colonial Marines, a lot was riding on Isolation to deliver, and taking a brief glance at some of the reviews at the time of its release, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it didn't live up to the expectations. But I really enjoyed the more basic and old school approach that the game took, which resulted in it being one of the finest survival horrors in recent memory. Set 15 years after the events of the first film, you're thrown into the role of Ripley's daughter, who's searching for answers about what happened to her mother. This leads her to an abandoned space station to retrieve the black box of the Nostromo, but it quickly becomes apparent that they're not alone, with the station being plunged into absolute chaos thanks to a single xenomorph, with various survivors and malfunctioning androids that make it far from easy to achieve her goal. One of the things that Isolation gets so right is how vulnerable you'll feel throughout your playthrough, with you only having access to makeshift items early on, like flares or noisemakers, to divert the unpredictable paths that the xenomorph takes. Its AI is truly impressive, and it'll keep you guessing and looking over your shoulder for the entirety of your playtime, with random events like a vent crashing open or sparks bursting from a panel, ensuring that no area feels safe as you slowly crawl through vents and look around corners or hide under tables, all in the hopes it won't catch you and meet your bloody end. On top of this, the game's art direction is something that really blew me away as a fan of the films, and it captures the retro futuristic vibe with bulky CRT monitors, flickering green screens, and the gritty industrial space station that's drenched in shadows and neon glows. So for anyone fond of the franchise, this is an absolute must-have, and is easily the best game to ever have the Alien name attached to it. After the huge success of the first game, it was only a matter of time until we would see a full-blown sequel to Outlast that would take its nail-biting first-person horror to an entirely different level. You take on the nightmare as Blake, a cameraman searching for his missing wife after a helicopter crash sees them both stranded in a strange and horrifying place. What starts out as a simple rescue mission soon spirals into a terrifying race to stay alive, as you hide in the shadows and try to stay out of the sight of a deranged cult who believe the end of the world is near, and the only way to stop it is human sacrifice. The narrative itself plays parallel to strange flashbacks within a school, with the mystery of how they connect soon becoming apparent the further you delve into the story. On the gameplay front, Outlast 2 is pure survival horror, where you're completely defenseless and constantly on the edge, as you've got no weapons to fight back and your only tool is a camcorder to help navigate, with a limited supply of batteries to keep it working. Because of this, the game leans heavily into stealth and forces you to use the environment to your advantage as you hide in tall grass, under beds or around corners, and make a run for it only when the coast is clear. The camcorder's night vision is your lifeline, but it uses up a lot of battery, which forces you to have to deal with how often you use it, which only adds to the overall fear that you'll feel throughout a playthrough. The enemies themselves can feel relentless at times, reacting to noise or light, and their unpredictable patterns will keep you guessing as when the time is right to make a move, with several difficulty modes that only increase their intelligence as well, it ends up being quite a challenging game to get through, but one that feels extremely rewarding if you do. Overall, Outlast 2 is survival horror in its purest form, and if you've never played it, it's definitely something you'll not want to miss. The Last of Us has quickly become one of Naughty Dog's most celebrated franchises, and while the second game is clearly better in terms of graphics and gameplay, I've always held the original in high regard, not only due to its story, but the way in which the world feels when compared to the sequel, as well as the inclusion of multiplayer that sadly hasn't been seen since. Now, for anyone living under a rock for the past decade, the story follows Joel, as he has to transport a girl across America who's said to be the key to developing a vaccine for an infection that's completely ravaged the world. While it does tell one of the best stories to come out of Naughty Dog, it's the gameplay that really cemented its success, which offers an incredible blend of stealth, action and horror. Now, you've got to rely on your surroundings and scavenge every piece of scrap to use to your advantage, from bricks and pipes that can be used as weapons on the infected, to various items that allow you to craft medkits or Molotov cocktails and shivs that open up a wide range of ways to approach the game. It's this freedom of approach that really helps the gameplay excel, and when confronted by hordes of infected, it's up to you to choose the best path forward, may that be stealth, all-out action or a mixture of both, whilst taking advantage of a pretty decent range of weapons. Now, it's hard to explain why this remaster holds up better to this day than the sequel or its remake, but for me it's mainly down to how it feels more nostalgic and retains the original aesthetic from the PlayStation 3 version, which delivers the mood and atmosphere in a far better way. Sure, this is all subjective and down to the individual who plays it, but it just feels better going back to this version of the game, and like I mentioned, the inclusion of factions is the icing on the cake. So if you're looking for the best way to experience The Last of Us, I'd still say the PS4 version is the best way to go. Not only is it cheaper, but it also manages to feel more authentic in the process. Ever since the days of the PlayStation 2, the Fatal Frame series has been amongst some of my favourites when it comes to survival horror, with its unique blend of Japanese folklore and out-of-the-box mechanics that make it something that it can truly call its own. Now, Maiden of Blackwater originally released for the Wii U back in 2014, but would end up getting ported to the PlayStation 4, which ended up being one of the best ways to experience it. It sees you following 3 different characters who investigate a cursed mountain that's said to be a sacred site surrounded in legends of deadly spirits and death, and they've all got their own reason to be doing so, with the story ending up being one of the finer aspects of the game. So I'll leave it to you to find out for yourself and talk about the gameplay, which is equally as impressive. It all revolves around the series' staple mechanic of using something known as the camera obscura, which allows you to exorcise ghosts by taking photos of them. And it may sound easy at first, but it's all about framing the perfect shot in the hopes of hitting a fatal frame, a sort of critical hit that can be pulled off with precise timing or capturing more than one ghost at a time, expanding on this mechanic of the different types of film for your camera that often have varying effects on the ghosts that you're trying to expel, such as slowing them down or increasing the amount of damage you deal out, making them something worth experimenting with, or saving for when the situation calls for it. Outside of the encounters with ghosts, you'll be finding keys or hidden items that will help you progress or solve light puzzles that offer a bit of downtime in between the scares, but the somewhat overbearing dread from your surroundings is just as foreboding, making for an adventure that'll keep you right on the edge. So if you can find it for a good price, Maiden of Blackwater deserves a spot in your collection as well. As a fan of horror games, I was first introduced to them with the Resident Evil series on the PlayStation. I've always had a soft spot for not only how these games played, but how they looked. So when Crow Country was announced, it seemed like something that would be right up my street, and it didn't disappoint, with it providing a clear retro-inspired horror experience with a modern twist. Set in the 1990s, it sees you taking up the role of Mara, a special agent who's sent to investigate an abandoned theme park known as Crow Country, filled with biohorrors that slowly work towards revealing the truth behind the park's sinister past. When it comes to the gameplay, this is where any fan of the old Resident Evil or Alone in the Dark games will instantly feel at home, especially with its fixed camera angles and interconnected world. As you would expect, exploring is at the heart of the experience, and you'll likely find yourself doing a lot of backtracking as you work towards solving one of the many different puzzles throughout the game, as you unlock new areas with keys and manage your limited inventory space, all the while the enemies doing anything they can to stop you in your enemy tracks. This is where Mara's limited arsenal of weapons come into play, and you've got a few different options which are slowly dealt out as you progress, from a standard pistol to a shotgun and crowbar that can help you fight back against the seemingly endless amounts of enemies that call the park their home. My favourite aspect of the game though is the low poly aesthetic, which really helps sell Crow Country and works to create a nostalgic feeling that any player from the PS1 days will instantly fall in love with. And with it being available for a pretty low price of entry, there's no reason not to pick this one up. Resident Evil 2 has long been considered one of the best entries in the series, and in 2015 it was announced that it would be getting a full-on remake that turned out far better than anyone could have expected. It's a complete departure from the original in terms of gameplay, and swapped the iconic fixed cameras for an over-the-shoulder third-person view of the action as you once again headed to Raccoon City as either Leon or Claire in the hopes of making it out of the nightmare alive. What makes this version of the game so undeniably perfect is how it amped up the gore and scare factor to 11 and re-envisioned many of the classic moments throughout the game with clear love and care. This is no more apparent than when it comes to the gameplay, that despite the change in perspective remains quite close to the original, with a heavy emphasis on item management and puzzles, and of the combat itself, which 9 times out of 10 is better to avoid, especially on higher difficulties as ammo becomes extremely scarce. As with many games in the series, unlockables are also a huge aspect of the overall experience, and for Resident Evil fans, this game's an absolute treasure trove of fan service, with plenty of secrets such as different costumes, items and concept art, as well as extra modes you can earn as you play the game. By far the most impressive aspect of the remake though has to be its visuals, that work to really increase the overall terror throughout the game. From the dimly lit streets of Raccoon City to the clean and clinical halls of Umbrella's lab, it stays faithful to the original whilst enhancing every aspect of it, making sure you feel each and every shot you take or attack from the many different monsters that roam the city in a real and visceral way. To put it short, this is easily the best Resident Evil game to come out in a long time, and if you're at all a fan of horror, you owe it to yourself to pick it up. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that'll be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Road Rage, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of the links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.